I'm going to start by introducing Katrina Stuart, who is, I know you told me the title, but basically she is the queen of MPPA. And you can give us the real title in a second. Please come up. Katrina has been with MPPA since, some time. And when MPPA became part of AP+, you were then also the one who headed specifically the real-time payments inside of AP+, which is now the wholesale sort of domestic rail organization. It also deals with FPOS and BPay. So that's sort of at the top of the chain, if you want. And then we have Nathan Churchward, who joins us from Cuscal. Now, Cuscal is the organization that maybe more than most ADIs in Australia have really done everything there is to do with new payments technology when it comes out. Again, you haven't paid me to say that, but it's true. And if you walk around Intersect and you talk to payment service providers like ourselves or others who are great at what they're doing, you're going to realize that Cuscal shows up pretty quickly. They're supported by them very often. I think it's because, again, you make it available to us and then we can make it available to others. Then I want to introduce Tony, who runs Wagepay, which is probably the organization that has more experience of actually doing PayTo than anyone else in the market. I'm saying that with a degree of confidence, but I don't want to provide any statistics. And then I also want to introduce Dianne, who is not yet using PayTo, running Eastern and Allied, a remittance business. It's been around for a long time. And we are keen to hear how this is going to run. I believe I'm the moderator. So I will sit somewhere over here with a degree of visibility of all of you. All right. I'm going to start by asking all of you, and that's the only time I'm going to ask a question that sort of goes from person to person to person. Hopefully after that, you'll sort of rebel and take over. When was the first time you heard of PayTo, and do you remember what you were doing at the time? Was it one of those JFK moments, or they landed on the moon, or whatever else matters? Dianne, when did you hear about it the first time?
Look, I can't remember exactly. When I heard it, I did think it was going to be this revolutionary thing, because we have customers that have said to us, just take money from our account and do it and provide the service to us. So we've had customers wanting it for years, and we just haven't been able to do it in the way that we think the experience should be. So I feel like it's been a couple of years now. I've been speaking to Tony quite a bit today, and I hope it's going to be the revolution that we think it is.
Good. All right. Nathan?
My story is a little bit different because you described Katrina as the queen of NPP. Can I be the father of PayTo?
So, please. I wasn't sure what title you wanted. I was thinking.
So 2017, I was part of the Debit Alternatives Working Group. I'm not quite sure what that acronym spells, but work it out. And we decided that to be a really true real-time payment system as an industry, we also needed to have the ability to provide a real-time debit alternative. And so that was the gestation was a very, very long elephantine gestation. But then we worked through all of that. And then we were in a committee meeting, and the name of PayTo was presented as the brand that
everyone just sat silent for 2 seconds.
And so like, it actually does exactly what it is on the tin. It actually does make a payment to who I trust from my account, so it closes that loop. And I thought it was really clever.
Good. All right.
I didn't pay him to say that.
Seems very clear by now. No one has paid anyone anywhere.
I started the journey similar to Nathan, maybe a little bit before we formed the Debit Working Alternative Group in about December 2016, when we were talking to a bunch of the banks involved in the MPP and the market, and basically everyone was saying, we need to think about debit, we need to think about payment initiation. I first heard about PayTo and I was waiting for about 350 options for the brand, and we kind of got it down to about 3, and then PayTo came out. But it's been a really exciting journey, because I think right from the beginning, I think we've seen the power and the potential of what the service can do. And what we've actually intentionally done over the years as we worked with industry to design it was to actually try and make it as broad and as extendable as possible. So as Nathan referenced, it started very much looking at how do we just modernise direct debit. I think what we've actually built and delivered to the market is so much more than that and can actually be used for a whole range of different use cases. And I think that's what's really exciting about it.
I actually heard it from you, Christian, as a merchant. Like basically, Christian was, saying this great thing about real-time direct debit, and I'm like, okay, I don't have to wait for 2 days for direct debit to, present a response back. That's great. So, a bit late to the journey compared to our, fathers and queens, but yeah,
I'm just going to stick with you now for this, at least intersect. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've heard it like from the guy who's promoting PayTo right now.
And so, Tony, let's stick with you for a second. You have by now a fair amount of experience, and your customers have a fair amount of experience of actually using PayTo. What hasn't worked?
Very interesting. Starting from the negative. So from Wagepay's perspective, because we're an wage access and wage advance provider in Australia, and the use case for us for PayTo is essentially replacing direct debit as the primary method of collecting a due payment. And in that sense, we've jumped on the PayTo journey quite early on in the bandwagon. What hasn't really worked for us is, and this is somewhat interesting, it's actually not people's hesitancy of accepting a PayTo mandate when they see it in their online bank account, but rather how the banks notify the customers that a PayTo mandate has been created. So there are journeys within PayTo that I think necessitates improvement. But I think as a innovative or revolutionary technology, it has that power to really change the way that we handle payments. Apart from that slight issue that I see, there's a whole range of benefits that I am getting, like my business is getting, from utilizing PayTo as part of the direct debit kind of experience.
Anyone wants to comment on that? Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions.
So I think that it's true that it is probably the challenge with PayTo. And very early on, when we were talking to our clients like Monoova and others, and they were getting feedback from their clients, it was, I don't want to have to leave my platform to go to the banking app. I think there's, with the amount of scams and frauds and other things that are happening in the market now, that level of friction is probably seen to be okay, and perhaps it's almost a positive friction that gives people confidence. But yes, there is that variability that as I guess industry providers and working on the committees and groups, we're facing into. One of the good things is, though, because of the way that Cuscal works and AP Plus works, which is very much as a collaborative co-design based solution, we had a meeting where we went through the Wagepay experience, and Tim talked us through how Tony's solution was working. And as an outcome of that meeting, one of Katrina's teams took the feedback from Tim and I that if we could present to consumers what they should expect, they could then be educated. So rather than relying on the bank to educate their customer about how a PayTo agreement works, although CommBank and Westpac are doing a pretty good job, that you could present that. So now we have a monthly update that will come out that will actually say, okay, well, if you're an ANZ customer, here is how you would authorise a PayTo agreement. And that means whether it's Monoova or Wagepay can then present that to the client. So it is an iterative process, but the good thing is that because it's pretty much a small community. Everyone talks about banking and payments being a small community. We're now seeing one of those benefits. It's not just about jobs, it's also about solutions to fix it.
I think in our example, the use case for us is quite different. We've got customers who we know bank with certain banks. And for us to launch all banks at one time, to experience some of the experience that Tony's clients are feeling, we might say that we won't turn on the banks that have a negative experience until we as a business are comfortable that the experience is good. Now, if you're saying Westpac and CBA, which I think our recent data is that 60% of our customers bank with those, we might just offer PayTo to those customers only. and so that we don't have an experience that is a failed agreement, or we won't offer direct debit in the way Tony still offers direct debit for those failed customers. We wouldn't want to do that because the nature of our service doesn't allow for it. So I think different use cases can allow for turning on all banks or not turning on all banks until a level of comfort is there. Yep. Yeah.
Katrina?
I just want to make a comment about the authorisation process and kind of that sort of friction piece. In the early days when we were thinking about how should that process work, and we did some user testing, it was interesting that actually customers felt more reassured by doing it within their banking app, because they have to authenticate themselves in order to authorise that agreement. And they kind of felt, well, if I'm actually authorising an organisation to take money from my account, I want to make sure that I feel I've got control and that that's been done in a really secure way. I think as with anything that's new, bedding down the customer experience will kind of take a little bit of time. I think also, though, once people have kind of used it once, it's like anything new, then they'll become familiar, know what is that journey. And I think to Nathan's point is about how do we make that first interaction as kind of smooth as possible. And we're really keen to see how we can work with industry and organisations that are using PayTo today to see how can we make any improvements of what needs to be done there for different use cases as well.
I think on the point of scams, sort of general security in payments, friction might matter, but it's also the right kind of friction. We know that in the context of scams and fraud right now, there are lots of great minds applying their time and thought to how do we prevent scams, ideally, and at least how do we recover when scams have already happened. And there are some great ideas out there and some probably they're not so great. Most of them include friction at some level, not all of them. I think here, needing to leave the checkout environment, in your case it's not really checkout, but that sort of the payment point, to authorize, I don't think it has to be bad, because in this instance, you are ideally working with a bank that sends you a sort of in-app message. You provide your thumbprint, and that's sort of it. Maybe there's another button of approve. But the good thing is you don't actually need to go back to the original checkout place for this now to be working. It is already active at that point. So I know that in the past, there were always concerns that as soon as you left cards, people would have to often leave, make a payment, and often, for various reasons, there was a step of coming back to the place where you made the purchase, and that's often where it failed. People got distracted, the cat ran through the room, someone was shouting somewhere, and they sort of just forgot that last step, and sort of conversion rates are way lower. I don't see that necessarily being the same issue. And another thing that comes up when we talk about PayTo with our clients or people who would like to be our clients, is that sort of, again, the scam, or fraud actually, how do we prevent fraud? I think the challenge is slightly a different one for this, because if someone has the ability to authorize an agreement inside your banking app, then you have way bigger problems. Then if someone actually has hijacked your bank account, and they're not going to use PayTo to steal your money. They're going to use whatever method they can find. They might even write a check with it. So it's not the same type of problem we're facing here, which is why, again, things like chargeback, etc., which often come up in conversation, I'd love to hear more about that here, is not quite as relevant in the context of PayTo as it would be in our normal lived experience of a card-based online purchase.
So in fact, often it gets described as a pull payment, and I actually don't agree that it's a pull payment. It's got the benefit of a consumer and a merchant experience of a pull payment because it's invisible, but it's actually better because it's specifically authorised and it's pushed from your account, and all of the protections and the security that's built into making payments from your bank account then apply to PayTo. So you get the best of both worlds.
Tony, again, you with a lot of experience here, can you tell us, at least, I'm not sure what you're willing to share, but how you set up the parameters of these agreements? Do you go specific amounts? Do you do variable? And are you seeing different levels of, you called it hesitance before, or are people happy to do it as long as they know it's from Wagepay?
From our perspective, we set it as, because the frequencies are non-determined, so it's what they call an ad hoc frequency, and then we put a maximum amount rather than a variable on the PayTo mandate. To be honest, really, when we look at the acceptance, around PayTo, initially there were questions around what is PayTo, so we have to do a certain level of education to our customer base. But after they understood that, like to be honest, the hesitancy when it comes to accepting a PayTo mandate is somewhat non-existent. When you get a customer to sign up, for example, to a direct debit agreement, imagine how much customer actually understands that agreement, right? It's a long letter of saying, oh, I'm going to do X and Y. PayTo specify, like summarize it, put it in very distinct terms. Here is what you expect. Here is what the merchant could do, and the limitation around that. And you have the ability to cancel or suspend. You don't really, well, if you want to cancel a direct debit, like I'm not sure how many people went through that journey. It's quite painful to cancel a direct debit. Whereas in PayTo, you log on to your online banking, you click on cancel.
And then you get told that it's happened, so you can then take the action, and you're not left holding the can later when you've gone to do the payment.
And that visibility and control that a customer has was actually one of the really kind of key benefits that we found as we were developing the service, in terms of the customers actually knowing, I can see that agreement. I feel like I've got control over my payments because I can take action if I need to. Whereas, yes, to your point, otherwise I've set up these agreements and I can't find them. And how do I cancel direct debit? And, what's my card attached to? And I have no idea until there's a failed payment. And that was actually really one of the key selling points from customers as well, to feel that they were kind of in the driver's seat, so to speak.
Nathan, sorry, was there anything else? No, okay. Dianne, in your mind, so again, you run a remittance business. What's the alternative at the moment? So you're not doing direct debits, you're saying?
We're not doing direct.
So it's not a replacement for direct debits, which is often how many of us think of it.
Yes.
What is it replacing?
It's replacing what Nathan sort of would normally call push payments. So we have card, we have bank transfer with PayID. What I think it does for our business is that we can create a service where effectively customers are setting and forgetting or subscribing. And so we have customer behaviour whereby regular customers will send money from themselves to their mother once a fortnight, once a month. They have to come in our app to do that and then go into their banking app and pay us. So what we want to do is they want to set that as for the next year, I want to make a payment to my mother every fortnight, set the instruction and then set the payment. And so we think that we can create a great level of stickiness, much more than we have now, by doing that. We think that we have a longer customer value as a result of it. We know that customers are forced to do it and don't want to do it, but I think that if we give them an alternative, they're not going to look elsewhere other than using our service. And I think there's this race to the bottom in remittance around fees and FX. I think this creates a value that you really can't quantify in a couple of dollars savings here and there. I just think that it's something that is actually changes the way that we do business and gives our customers something that's quite differentiated. Something that they need to do, they don't love to do, but we can make it simplified for them. So I think that we could price it so that it actually returns greater value for us. I think that there's a huge, huge retention and loyalty play for us here. And I can't see many people wanting to offer it yet, because it is hard to do.
What do you mean by that? What is hard? Is it the variable customer experience on the road, or the technicality of the integration, or what do you mean?
I don't think it's a technicality. Like Tony actually will give you lots of praise around the integration piece being not a hard thing. I mean, I think it is the customer experience. So we have from end to end at the moment, we try to make it a real-time experience. PayTo mandate, I agree, we're going to be educating customers. I think we're going to be living an experience of every single bank that we turn on. And so I think that that's sort of the hardest piece. Do customers see value? I think they will. But it's us as an organisation, us learning, just like Tony's been learning, what the experience is for each bank, and then trying to communicate, sort of do the branding work for PayTo, do the experience work, follow up for the banks, and educating them. And so we're not immune to this. I remember when we tried to convert customers from in-store to online, we called up banks and asked the banks to help get their account numbers taught them how to do internet banking. This is sort of another iteration of that. We're teaching people how to do something so that they are sticky to us. So we're putting in the hard work now, but I think that there is a place for Monoova to get Tony's feedback, to get Cuscal's feedback, to get industry feedback about how that user experience is changing amongst the banks. That would, I think, alleviate some of the work that each individual merchant has to do.
And it seems like we're already on the way there, which is, I think, very, very helpful. I want to return to the two of you in a second, but just Tony, so there are some benefits that I think are more intuitively understood, which is if I don't have to wait for 2 days, that seems like a good idea. And you don't have to say so much more really than that. And then you can throw in a few other things and say, well, I don't have to wait if it's a card transaction. So if we're replacing direct debits, it seems like a no-brainer in many cases, particularly when certainty and security of funds, etc., matters, which is the case for many. When you compare it to cards, it's really twofold, I would argue, which is one is with a card, yes, you get the sort of guarantee of funds today, but you actually get the money tomorrow. The actual money is coming tomorrow, even though you can be pretty sure the Visa, MasterCard, and someone's going to give it to you. Is there anything else that you would think has been a surprise? I mean, I asked you before about the negative, like what hasn't worked. If I turn around and say, what were you not expecting would be a benefit that has been a benefit? If there has been none, then obviously tell us that.
Yeah, to be honest, like the key benefit, and I would just like to highlight, is that cash flow component. When you do card payments, it's indeed real-time status, but the fund arrives sometime later. With PayTo, you send through the request, you receive an approved PayTo transaction, you get the funding within the next couple seconds or so, right? That flow of funds is crucial for any business, and not to be really underestimated. But the other component is really, you actually develop more trust with your customers with PayTo, because you are taking them into that online banking space where they're comfortable, and you're interacting with them using that. So you actually develop more trust with your customers. But on top of that, you're also, from a reconciliation perspective, imagine in the direct debit world, you're waiting for payment, and then you have to reconcile that back. Have you received the actual payments? Yes or no, right? There's late direct debit dishonors. Not sure whether you guys experienced that, but it's quite painful for merchants when a bank notifies you that, look, they forgot to tell you that the payment actually failed, and then you have to contact your customers to advise them about the situation, and the customer gets confused, and it's very, very painful. Whereas from a PayTo perspective, that reconciliation is really easy and simple for the business to do. So that also saves a lot of time around your finance team, and try to get them to work on something else rather than going through records and payment records and make sure it matches.
Okay, thank you. So back to the two of you who've been not just consuming PayTo, but sort of producing PayTo in various roles. My earliest memory of PayTo was not PayTo. It was service number 3, I think it was called, or something, which was some kind of request to pay type of service. And this is now going back to sort of payments Middle Ages, which was about 2018 or something, where there was a different iteration, different thinking around it back then, where I can't remember exactly, but essentially I still needed to act on it as a consumer from memory. So someone would, maybe Wagepay would send me a request to pay, I would receive it in my CBA app, which is what I'm using, and I would then have to say, yes, go ahead. Whereas with this, as we know, it's sort of set and forget, but with controls to cancel if you want. So I set it up, and then payments will move automatically for as long as I want to, and then I say no. Can you tell us a little bit about where you think that sort of the major shifts in the thinking around PayTo have happened over whatever time horizon you think matters, whether it's 2018 or 1918 or just a year or two ago? And also, where do you think we can still see change? I mean, my expectation here would be that PayTo is not set and forget as a concept. It might be as an experience, but there's going to be something that ideally will keep on moving and changing. Do we already have some sense of what that can look like?
Shall I start? So yes, initially when the platform was still being designed, there was a tender process, and BPay was selected as the provider of that first service, and a future iteration was going to be OSCO Request to Pay. When we were looking at how do we develop what became the PayTo service on the MPP, we felt that having a service whereby a customer had to authorise every single transaction at every time was for certain use cases, and given that basically we were requiring the entire banking industry in Australia to uplift their channels and their back office environment to support PayTo, to try and make it as extendable as possible. So not just to support a transaction that had to be authorised each time by the customer, but for recurring payments like direct debit, but also for things like ad hoc payments as well that Tony's articulated as his particular use case, and actually be able to cater for all of those different types of transactions, and also not just for a customer to say, I'm going to pay my Telstra bill, for example, but also for situations whereby a business could, say, authorise a third party to do their payroll run or superannuation and other use cases as well. So given that we were requiring the entire industry to kind of uplift the capability, we really wanted to make sure that we could kind of sort of largely build it once from a foundational service perspective, and then be able to support a whole range of different use cases. And certainly, I think, PayTo will evolve over time, but we wanted to make sure that initial kind of build and deliver effort, which has taken us since about 2017, so just take a little while, really kind of got us to a point where we could then really start to use it for a range of different things once we had the kind of pay a customer network established.
So I think where the growth of a lot of the use cases will come in are those embedded and automatic payments. I think there'll actually be just as many transactions that are individual as the ones that are for recurring. So we'll see as people become much more used to the experience, they'll go, oh, okay, well, I can do this as a one-off because it's still actually a really great embedded, rich digital experience in the app that I love to use for everyday shopping, and then they would put that in. But alternatively, there's more and more platforms that are becoming part of the way that we do business. So I can see platforms creating a PayTo service for the businesses that are on that platform, and therefore it becomes very scalable and a great experience. So PayTo being a very experience-led rather than a request to pay was a payment-led solution, does open it up itself to a lot of that. I think that, and I said this at one of your events last year, that PayTo will probably form the basis of whatever comes out of CDR for payment initiation, because we've got...
That's a bomb for those who know about it.
Yes, we've got so much of that already. So I think that, again, as you think what's going to be next, it will be what else can we embed this in so that we stop building new things and start extending capability we've got.
Yeah, I think, as you pointed out, it is often referred to as a pool payment. I know you have pointed out that we have done that. And that's because we often think of it as this new cool, the direct debit of the future, and direct debit is a pool payment. But you're right. What we're talking about, and as Tim pointed out, is really a consent layer on top of something that already exists, which is just I push a button in my banking app and money shows up in your banking app. Yeah. So the underlying transaction is exactly what's already happening all the time, and all of you have used it already. And on top of that, we put this consent thing. Thought about in those terms, then all of these other use cases that you talk about become very intuitive, because what it means is at the moment we're jumping in. I always use the same analogy, and I haven't come up with anything new today. We jump in a car without seatbelts at the moment. And we think that's perfectly fine because we've never seen a car with seatbelts. Well, about your customers have, but that's essentially it. And PayTo, what allows us to do at the moment, we use a drop-down menu if we have an account number we already know about, or we type in an account number for the first time if we haven't used it before, and we sort of hope for the best. Press the button. We probably look at the digits a few times. We look at it again. Yes, I remember the name. I've paid them before. We're fine. But what this does, it sort of removes all of that because I know that this has been authorized with the merchant. So this money can't go anywhere. There's no risk. There's zero risk of me fat fingering and paying Johnny rather than Jenny. That cannot happen. And it's almost like getting a receipt before you've paid. So I think in so many ways, again, coming back to the messianic component of this, it is very hard to think of anything that wouldn't use this as a default, where, again, there could be exceptions. I absolutely agree that there are exceptions, but there will be exceptions. It'll be, why wouldn't you use PayTo rather than why would you? But we're just so early on. The market for personal computers, well, 200 in the world, whatever we said in 1980, that was wrong. And I think the market for PayTo is not in Wagepay. I think there are probably a few more. It's just that you're leading the way. All right, I'm going to open up to questions in a few seconds, but as always, I'm going to ask someone something else so that you can think of it, and then just to realize that there were no questions and it's an awkward silence, and we'll go. But you have 2 minutes to come up with a way of solving the problem for me, or not having an awkward silence. So we go back here. When you thought about this, Dianne, for Eastern Allied, were you looking at lots of different options? Because, I mean, PayTo is, after all, not the only way of paying in the world. Yeah. Clearly, you've had some already. Was PayTo competing with anything else?
No. Look, it's actually a little bit in a league of its own. And I go back to your so that pre-verification of who you're paying. So that's a big problem for customers. But actually, for us, we have a compliance policy where if you're Christian and you're the customer, you have to be the payer. That's our internal policy. So for us, we often receive payments and go, oh, actually, Nathan paid for Christian's transaction. Okay, so what's the process here? We onboard Nathan, we refund Christian. And so actually, it takes the compliance work out for us because we pre-validate you. Yep. It's something that we only can do after we receive the payment at present. So our compliance guys love it, because there's just no...
And they haven't even started.
They haven't.
Imagine when it begins.
Our payment guys, our compliance guys just think, look, it's just two processes in one. Yeah. And so once you've got that, then you can deal with this customer, you know this customer, and it's not like it's... The process is instantly seamless, much more seamless than any other payment option, because other payment options where you push in the original push sense, you sort of wait to see when the payment will come, who's sent it to you, and have they paid enough. And so that's the biggest problem in manual processing of transactions now. Wrong amount, wrong sender. And so now if we can pull the amount we know, attach it to a reference, know who it's coming from in advance, then it just solves everything for us. We have so many issues trying to pre-do that stuff now. So there's really nothing else that's the same for our internal compliance rules.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know if you've been to a wedding, but most of you probably have at some point. And there's this sort of point in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, doesn't exist in Sweden, where you sort of ask, anyone who knows something or has an objection to be made, now please say or forever hold your peace. It feels a bit like we're getting married to PayTo up here. Does anyone know of anything here that makes you think PayTo is not for you? I mean, will you forever hold your peace? Yes, carry on.
Well, that lady from Kane. I love the concept of PayTo. I love the concept of my reward points on my credit card. Where's the challenge? Where's the balance in that do you see coming from PayTo?
Nice.
I think we're seeing a shift in the market where rewards are not just provided by your credit card. You look at the number of offers you get in that card that are now moving the rewards and the recognition to be merchant funded. So why wouldn't we see in the future merchants rewarding you to use PayTo? So, for example, I switched to using everyday pay because I get double the points from Woolworths for using that particular way of making a payment. They do that because they get benefits from it, so it's worth them investing in me. There will be merchants that make that same position. Dianne's talked about the benefits that she gets in her business, so potentially there is others would invest back.
And it's often the case that a card transaction, not always, but often the case that a card transaction is a fair bit expensive, a bit more expensive, particularly once you start paying higher amounts. And it's often expensive for the merchant. Obviously, they can surcharge, but they know that the cost of surcharging is that everyone hates them. So they sort of take the pain. People love them, but behind the scenes, they're still gritting their teeth. So if they can incentivize their customers to go PayTo, maybe put in $5 worth of something, instead of paying $7 to Visa or someone else, it might be worth it. But yeah, I think you. All right, Brenton.
Hi, Brenton from Mastercard. I had a question about privacy in this circumstance. You've got an option to do BSB account number or Pay ID. In the world that Pay ID is an address and that address is currently personally identifiable, is there a plan from APP to look to have some sort of an anonymity around that to make sure, like, because you're sharing a payment and you're also sharing a personal identifiable information at that time, which as a payer, I shouldn't necessarily have to share.
So the way that Pay ID works is customers have to opt in terms of registering their Pay ID with their financial institution and then linking it to whatever particular bank account they want to link it to. They can also look at some limitations around what the name that's used for their Pay ID name as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be full name. It might be K. Stuart, for example. I mean, obviously it needs to be a close enough representation of who I am to make sure that, you know, if you're paying me, you know that you're paying the right person and not somebody by mistake. You know, I think, and in the early days of the MPP, there were some, you know, issues that people were raised around Pay ID. Like, now someone has my mobile number. But actually, a lot of the information that in that case is probably available anyway. Like, if you really wanted to find out that information, you could probably find it. There's also the option around what you use as your Pay ID as well. So, you know, you could use an email kind of string as well. It doesn't have to be your mobile number, for example. It could be, if you still have it, a landline, or it could be, you know, using you know, an email address.
Special purpose email address.
Yeah, exactly. There doesn't actually have to be, you know, what actually maybe is my email address that I use for my correspondence.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's right.
As long as you can verify, you know, that you have access and right to use that email address. It doesn't have to be the one that you use to actually get email.
Like, yes. Maybe like the idea could be you could actually monetize this opportunity whereby you start selling, so you could have the Monoova as your Pay ID, rather than having your ATM, for example.
I mean, what happens in our case is that our clients almost always use their own domain. Yes. So you'll pay someone at wise.com. And it's obviously not an actual email address. It's not the case that there are millions of Australians out there with something at wise.com email address, but it is something that is in format an email address. Yeah.
Because the whole purpose of Pay ID was to make it a simpler way to address payments to a bank account, but also to get that confirmation that you're paying the right person. And we did some research about, I think it was about 18 months ago now, and it was actually quite startling that 1 in 4 users had either stopped or edited a payment because they actually saw who they were paying beforehand and could correct it.
Wait a minute.
Because of Pay ID. That's right. Exactly. Whereas, you know, at the moment, if you're paying BSB and account numbers, you're blind, you know. And yes, you sit there and you check it and you check it and you check it again, and then maybe you check it again, and then you still have that anxiety that, am I still paying the right person?
And we're getting up to about 20% of payments now are directed to a pay ID. So people clearly are comfortable with that level of, I guess, revealing their mobile number or their email address to get the benefit of the convenience.
I'm going to get just to follow on from that. Everyone was comfortable sharing all of their data, and then all of a sudden they're not, right? So I guess it's a question like, is there a future whereby you could nominate something that is identifiable? Is that possible? I mean, that's the big thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back to then, you know, how do you then verify that it's actually the person is who they say they are, and not actually a scammer that's, you know, trying to get your funds, etc. So I think there's always that balance and that tension. But from a technical capability, yes, it could evolve to anything.
I have a concern about PayTo in terms of handling all the different errors and the different types of messaging we now have to create as a result of customers cancelling or suspending PayTo agreements when you've got different operations happening. I think in Tim's slide there was 110 errors, and I thought, do we have to have messaging around the 110 errors, and does that mean that's a different scenario that we have to handle? So I think for us, I mean, I think that's a new stream of work. See the benefit, but also a lot of work that we wonder what the magnitude of that is. It's a bit of an unknown at the moment. It's a bit unknown, the behaviours of customers, because it's so new, that if we were to take the plunge, and we will because we see the benefit, but what the work is associated with that.
Yep. Tim, I might get this wrong here, in which case I'll look like an idiot. But if we if we start with 110, is that what we consume?
That's what we consume, and we handle as many as possible for you. But
Is it a fair question to ask? So how many do we expose? Is it?
yes, but I don't know.
Okay. So now we both look at this. So it goes down. It's less than 110.
Yes.
Okay. It's 109. So you're fine. You're good. 109 and a half.
Yeah.
Maybe I can answer to that because
Please. What did we actually tell you?
What do you
yeah,
get?
yeah. So I mean, there's roughly around 20 or less that you really need to care about in terms of what those responses are, and you contact your customer accordingly or display on your front end in our app that this error has occurred, and then you try to guide the customer through the next steps and tell them what you should be doing next. I mean, there's only a handful that really pops up, and the thing that I'm worried about is something that doesn't have a description on that error. It's like, okay, I haven't seen this before, what's going on? Those are the ones that are more concerned. If you ask me, I want to receive more error codes just so that I know exactly what the customer is going through. From a merchant perspective, you try to help the customer. If you don't know what they're experiencing, well, how can you actually help them? Yeah.
Okay, 110 to 20. Let's remember that. Thanks, Tony.